The catalyst of the film, where the woman's son is deployed, my son was actually deployed, so that was the catalyst for it. What the character in the film goes through, I didn't live that. I'm a very good swimmer also. But I did want to explore, and I wanted to touch on depression, and it's brought on by a loved one being deployed, and the awareness that at any moment you can die, and then death just being too close, and then getting trapped, and being inspired by Bergman and Cassavetes and Antonioni, like Il Grido. I wanted to really explore what it is for people to be trapped. How do you live in depression? I originally started on the film that he saw last year, The Amaranth. We were filming in Idaho, and I was in the pool late. It was a very intense, very restrained performance. So it was late at night. My daughter had come to visit. I'm kicking my water in the pool, and I was like, and there's like Fellini-esque Nino Rota music playing, and I start filming the bubbles and the light and the kicking, and my daughter's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm filming my next film. It's called Drowning. It's slightly sarcastic. But my son was deployed in that moment. So the absurdity of everything was hitting me. Like, we were filming in Ketchum, which is like this gorgeous place. And yet I knew all these other worlds were happening, including my daughter was in her final year at school, and everybody's in their own world. Everybody has their own suffering. Everybody wakes up at night at any age, at any place, and wonders, what am I doing? What am I doing here? So I just started writing and writing and writing. Before we started filming, it's really when the editing began. So my editor is Alexis Evelyn, and my cinematographer is Christopher Seuss, and he's brilliant. So we created a language. So we were already editing before we started filming. And then when we really sat down to edit the film, that's when it was decided what scenes should be kept in and how to maintain it and how much driving are we going to use. It is set in Los Angeles. There is a monotone, a constant monotone of driving where you are in a bubble. Like you can be on the free, I guess you have it here too. Like you're stuck on the freeway and if you step outside of, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to be late. And you look around, like everybody's like talking, reading, screaming, and we're all in these like in our brain, our bubbles. So because I'm an actress, I feel that every character is important and that every character has a life of their own. So I really wanted the audience, and I really wanted to write, and I know most of the actors. I've worked with them. They're my friends, and I really wanted to give them, even if it's in a smaller role, I really wanted to give them, try to encapsulate their struggle, their life, and what they're going through. Again, to touch on, like Gil Bellows playing Frank, he's having this crisis of, I'm a professor, I teach mythology, but I'm just like going to classes, watching class after class come through, but I want to connect. I want to go to those places. I want to write a book. And Mira's character, where she's so put together and she's so fun and she's so beautiful, but you don't realize that what she's gone through and what she actually is going through. And we see all these beautiful people like right here, and like everybody has a story we don't know about. What's interesting to me is because we were in Rome, so with these interviews is how people come to me personally, and they're like, well, when I went through a depression, or I really connected to that because of this. So I wanted each character to have that. Even the hookup scene in the bookstore, like, these are two people who are lonely, trying to find connection.
Yeah, and I love that.
There's a part of the process in painting where you should not share it with anyone because it will be ruined. But when you come to a place where you're like, I'm done, then you have to share. No matter what, there are going to be notes, non-stop. And Paul Thomas Anderson, okay, so Azazel Jacobs, who directed me in The Lover, said in independent filmmaking, what you've written is not what you're going to see on the screen, and you need to be able to let go, which was a huge lesson. And he and Paul Thomas Anderson said, every opportunity you have, make it better. So with the notes, they both said to me, listen to the notes. If you can use them to make it better, take them. If you can't, let them go. So the minute I started engaging with people, it's like, well, you need to this. And I'd be like, okay. You need to that. Okay. And most of the time I have two reactions, either okay, or it's like no. And then I'm like, oh, but, you know, so, and my producers got used to that. No, forget it, fuck off. And then actually, so I feel that with independent filmmaking, and in my experience, there's just going to be notes nonstop. Even during the edit, Albert Chi, one of our producers, set up you need to, at this date, we want to see a version, and within 3 days, all the producers have to give notes. 3 weeks later, we need to see another version, and all the producers within 3 days have to give notes. And so it's very collaborative, and even like you were saying, like with the characters and like my friends, I don't necessarily write the role for someone, but once they are cast, then I go in and I change it, which is a form of notes. So it's a constant collaborative process. Mira and Chris and her husband, who is also in the bookstore, and Sarah Butler. So they were the first ones. I was on an Antonioni kick. There was a retrospective at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and I rewatched Fellini and I rewatched Cassavetes, and Mira and Chris were like, we can, like Ingmar Bergman, he always works with a similar group. Fellini and Marcello Mastroianni. So they were like, you should do this. We can do this. So I approach filmmaking from that. It's this group where we can create art. I don't actually write for a person, but once the person is cast, so I didn't know for sure if Mira wanted to play Mary or Jay wanted to play the swim instructor. Once I know they're gonna do it and I meet with them, because they're like, well, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, what do you want to bring? Like, as an actor, like, I'm giving you the freedom to do what you want. But then I often would rewrite, not per se for them, but for them, in that role. Like, how can I make it richer in that role? Like, Jay Moore, we all know him as a comedian. Like, I've known him for years because I worked on a John McNaughton film with him. Now I can't. Speaking of sex. And so Jay and I are very close. And everybody thinks of him as funny. And his stand-up is actually about sadness and depression and horrible abuse that he grew up in. And he's also a poet. Like really profound poet. So as much as there's humor in those scenes, I wanted him to play it also as like, someone who he sees her suffering, Yeah, and he has a groundedness. I wanted him to allow him to have that groundedness that often I feel he doesn't get, because it's like, Jay Moore. Jay Moore. He was so beautiful.
It does really mix humor, but also there's some very emotional sequences.
Intimate. It's very. I think all the scenes also are very intimate, and that's what interests me. The intimacy, relationships.
You can hear like a battle,
Yeah.
and then at the end, right? Yes.
Nothing. Yeah.
I also feel like there wasn't a lot of color, but there was red a lot. I don't know if that's just me like looking into things too much.
Say that again.
I saw that there was like red.
Here and the pops of red. Yeah.
Exactly. So I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about some of those choices that you made.
Okay. So before we started filming, because we shot in 9 days, the Chris Seuss, the cinematographer, and Alexis, the editor, Chris and I met a lot, and we discussed films, photography, artists, Edvard Munch, and created this visual language and a color, so that when you do see red, it's very specific. And there was no time for playback, so I had to trust, with Chris and Alexis. It was like, all right, did we get what we were looking for? So there was that, and the color, like even like Let the Right One In is actually a vampire film, but stylistically, in the Ingmar Bergman sense, we wanted that where that character in Let the Right One In, she just keeps, like, year after year, this lonely existence, and watching people die. So we wanted that isolation. We really wanted visually to be able to capture and show and let the audience feel the inner life of the character. And then red, the moments of red, like the therapist says, paint the room any color you want. And the couch, green, like opposites, which optically creates yellow. But so she starts to paint the wall red, and theoretically it's red, life, but suddenly it's like blood. Is he dead? And these a red mark on the wall. Like, I think one of the first moments of humankind, like making art, they think, is a Neanderthal put a spot of red pigment on a wall. That's life, so blood has this dual aspect of life, but in her, it's like, does this mean, everything is about death. Does this mean I just killed him?
And like I said, the parts of the car and everything like that.
Oh yes, so yeah, the car, we isolated, bluish gray, desaturated, and the music and the sound. It's World War II battle sounds, and it was Army radio, and we wanted it so that you hear it, but it's not. We don't want you to. I don't want you to be like, oh, they're telling the story. It's just this, like, I gotta hold on to it, and maybe my loved one won't die. Like, there's a connection. I can't quite let go of that. What's interesting is when we premiered in Rome, we had to deliver a subtitled version, and they subtitled all the radio. So when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, everybody's going to be reading it. It's going to become far more important than it ever was. I think it benefits me in the sense that the question you asked earlier about, it's important for me that every character has a life, and every actor feels this is an opportunity for me to really be heard and seen. I'm not just, I call it authentic background. I was going for that, as well as, like, unconsciously, in order to swim, you need to learn how to breathe. Breathing is and relaxation is a big part of learning how to swim. Trust, in the water, because I love swimming. But the other thing I was going for was that she does accomplish this goal she sets herself. That, you know, Jim O'Heir says in the military video, hell, I even learned how to swim, you know, take up a new hobby, learn something new. So she learns, she accomplishes this, and she realizes it's not, that is like, it's not, that's not gonna solve the problem. I did it. There are still gonna be problems, but life goes on. So like in the Albert Camus novel, The Stranger, at the end, he, you know, you watch this whole journey, he's not having the correct emotional response and ends up being condemned to death. And at the last minute, he looks out a window and he's like, oh my God, the sky is beautiful. This is it. This is life. You just have to embrace and be in the moment. And yeah, death is part of it, but this is your life. You're in it. So that was part of the culmination of like, I've learned how to swim. Okay, it didn't solve the problem. We're still gonna die, but somehow I think that snaps her out of this, I can't move. I wasn't addressing, I wasn't addressing it for like a mental health, but I do feel that humans suffer. There is suffering in being alive, and we all have it. Just, it's like an international, like in Rome, like people like you, like I'm having interviews and they're like, you know, I had depression, and it's like love is international, like it's a human, like inescapable, and suffering is inescapable. But I really did want to allow one to see what depression is, and which will make some people respond very personally, and some people won't want to watch it. Like, I get that. As an actor, I always take every role very, very seriously. Like, I want to make it real. So even as a filmmaker, like I wanted to make this real, so you feel it. I'm kind of in awe, and I'm so honored that I was in Rome, where my heroes made films with a film. Like, I can hardly believe it. Like, it was just, this is it. Like, this is what you live. I could start crying, but this is what you live for. And now, I'm gonna start crying. So I went to the awards luncheon last night, and I'm listening to all these people with their acceptance speeches. And this festival in Austin is so much about the writer and the importance of a writer. And I think that's lost. And I was so moved by how personal writing is. And the opening speech of that luncheon was, you guys are job makers. You, out of nothing, take pen to paper or fingers on whatever, and you write these stories. And when you write the end, that's the beginning of a film. And when you look at the trailer, all those people have jobs because you wrote this thing. Like you're important. Like, it's such an honoring of such a personal craft that is done in abject isolation. And it's just such an honor to be part of this festival and here. Like, with all these, like, I'm kind of like shell-shocked. Like, I can't believe I'm part of this.
It was very deserving.